Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brendan with Evoke Bike. So in this video, I want to talk about how you can improve your FTP with less threshold intervals. What we're going to talk about is why did we in the past ride so much at threshold? I definitely came from that camp of training. Why should we still today ride at threshold with constant power intervals? And then what do I think we can do that I've done in the past to increase my FTP with a couple different strategies besides just cranking out these 15, 20-minute constant power intervals. So a couple quick shout outs to our new subscribers on YouTube, Robbie, Saeed, Brad, and Paul. If you guys like these videos, please like them, share them, and subscribe. This question came up from one of the training packs that we've been working on, and I'll put a link in there. If you guys want to dive deeper on specific topics, we're going to be posting these on our website. And this came actually from our time crunched athlete pack that we're working on, hopefully have ready to put out next week. So why did we ride at threshold so much? I started training seriously back in 2009, and riding at threshold to increase and we'll talk about the difference between FTP and lactate threshold, is really an outdated training philosophy. And I'm not knocking it. I came up on that model. That's how I was coached. And while it will make you faster as a newer athlete, this is not the best way to improve your FTP. But why do we do it so much? Because we were under the impression that ride at threshold, you'll adapt and come back stronger and push higher watts. But I was always thinking, why? And I'm not saying I was some great forward thinking person, but I always thought like, hey, shouldn't we be doing some more like supra threshold? I always felt like when we would do some shorter, harder intervals, so let's talk 105%, 110%, those are the race winning moves, not just these, hey, the guideline for me was, hey, ride at 98 to 103%. Yeah, there's a benefit to that. We'll talk about that in a second. But this does not increase or improve, I should say, your lactate threshold, which is related to FTP. Lactate threshold is the inflection point if you go and take a lactate test where the lactate exponentially increases. Whereas FTP, once power meters came out, functional threshold power, is the power that you can put out in a quote unquote, from the creators, quasi-steady state for about an hour. Both are very similarly related. That's why we hear them used intermixed, but they're not the same exact thing. Why should we ride at threshold? And why do I still do some threshold intervals? I definitely prescribe them to certain athletes. You're going to have an increased endurance at this power. So if your threshold's 300 watts, if you never really ride at it, I find that after 8-10 minutes, it's hard for athletes to hold that power. If you do that for longer durations, you'll be able to ride at that duration longer. Obviously very beneficial for races, grand fondos, group rides, etc. You're also going to get some muscular strength increase from that constant pressure on the pedals. No, this is not a substitute for lifting in the gym, but there is benefit to that, and especially for newer riders. That's where a lot of newer riders really see these gains when they do big sweet spot plans. Again, not knocking it. It's not what I would recommend, but it's having the consistent pressure of being pretty darn hard. Riding at 95% is not easy, and motoring there, kind of getting yourself into that diesel engine, which has its benefits in cycling. And lastly, really, these are lactate tolerance intervals. You're learning how to deal with the feeling of lactate and pushing. And as you get longer in these sessions, they become harder to mentally tolerate, and you become more acclimated to doing that. So what should we do instead? Constant power intervals should still be in your training diet for most of us, but it shouldn't be the main driver of FTP improvement. Obviously, VO2 max intervals. You'll hear people say this will raise your aerobic ceiling, which is true. Increase your aerobic capacity, technically. And at the same time, the mental side of this game, you do some VO2 max intervals, and then you go try and do some supra threshold intervals, they are much more palatable. Whereas if supra threshold, say defining that as 105, 110% FTP, if that is your max at a long duration of 8 minutes, let's say, those are much harder to swallow than if you're doing 120, 130% FTP intervals, okay? Over-unders, I've talked about these a billion times on the channel. We have in the Training Peaks store. I've now put together some workouts in there. I'm not a huge fan of templates, but what I want to create for athletes that have been asking me over the past 3 years, yo, will you make some workouts that I can do, physically make the workout in Training Peaks so I can put it on my Garmin? I'm going to start doing that because I see some benefit with these training guides. And then to continue, what should we do instead? Continue with some threshold, but I would really use the constant power when you're testing your numbers, even though we have to be careful with this. If I go and do a 20-minute test and I do it on a climb, there's going to be a little bit of over-under nature because I'm often climbing it. I want to climb that climb as fast as possible. If the average power is lower, but I'm doing it faster because I'm surging on, where it gets steeper, where you gain the most time, I throttle it back to 100%. Now I'm at 110. Now, on a test, you're riding at 100, probably a little bit over 105%. So you want to be able to push those watts. So use those VO2 max over-unders and some threshold to increase your FTP. And really, I truly, truly, truly believe that the over-unders are what is going to help your lactate threshold, the actual ability to clear lactate and produce lactate at the same wattages. So if you really want to get more into this, we're going to post a time crunched athlete guide. You can use that. We have a ton of blogs. There's still a ton of free information out there. We will always have free content to help you out. What we're going to do is put out these guides that we've worked really hard on boiling everything down. That's not a 50-page book that you have to read through to get the main points. It's here's the issue that we're looking at. Here's what you can do to apply it to your training. And now you're off and pedaling. So I know everyone is super busy. All of these guides should really be for time crunched, labeled as time crunched. Thanks for your support and everything in watching the video, sharing it with your friends. Hope you have a great weekend. Crush your training. Just set a new 6-minute best at age 40. Don't stop training. Don't let anyone tell you that you're at your finish line. Keep freaking going. Let's go.